It's a great honor and pleasure for me to introduce Les Kaye. Les is abbot of the Kannon Do Temple here in Mountain View and a master in the Soto Zen lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. Many of you probably know Les's teacher through the wonderful book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Many of you probably don't realize that the lectures collected in this beautiful book were given by Suzuki Roshi here in Silicon Valley at the small sitting group that ultimately grew to become the same Kannon Do Temple that Les now leads. In the introduction to Les's own book, Zen at Work, my friend Misha Merrill describes Les's unique place in our local Zen history in this way. Les was profoundly affected by Suzuki Roshi and his teachings, and within a few years, he was a Zen monk, practicing with a small group in Los Altos, California, where Suzuki Roshi came to speak once a week. Now, this may not seem so odd, considering the times. Plenty of people in the San Francisco area were doing some pretty exotic things during the 60s and early 70s. Zen practice was just one item on the menu. But imagine, if you can, a neatly dressed IBM manager sitting in the midst of all this craziness, someone who continued to have an ordinary home life and drive to work every day, 9 to 5. That was something else indeed. After more than 30 years at IBM, Les eventually retired in 1990 to devote himself to Zen teaching and practice at Kannon Do and beyond. He has long taken a special interest in the integration of meditation practice and working life. So he is a wonderful guest to join us here at Google, where so many are trying to do the same. Please join me in welcoming Les Kaye.
Good afternoon. It's exciting for me to be here. And it's an honor because you have had some terrific guest speakers over the last several months. And thanks to Meng, I've had a chance to review the videos of two of your most recent speakers, John Kabat-Zinn and Matthew Ricard. That's how you say it, Matthew? That's good. Matthew Ricard. And they were very inspiring and very touching talks that they gave, and the videos were wonderful. And I was very moved by their presence, the presence of these two men. To me, they exhibited, I can't see you if I do that. These men exhibited four outstanding qualities. First of all, they're very smart. They're very intelligent men. They showed dedication and sincerity to the work that they were doing on behalf of others. They were very wise. And finally, they were just nice guys. And if any of you see them, either of them, if you did, I think you'll agree those are four qualities that they displayed. Now, today you have me. Now, my intelligence doesn't come near theirs. They have their PhDs from very well-respected universities in very difficult scientific topics, and me, I'm just grateful that I have my Bachelor of Science. My intelligence doesn't match theirs. I don't know where we get our intelligence from. Is it genetic? Do we get it in the first few years of our life? I don't know where we get it from, but at some point, you realize you can't really do much about enhancing your intelligence. You got what you got at some point in your life. I can't do anything about my intelligence. But these three other factors, I have some choices. And we all have choices about those other factors. About being dedicated and sincere, about being wise, and about being nice people. To have those qualities, in Buddhism, that's called selflessness. It's called selflessness, to be selfless. And we can all make that kind of effort if that's the way we want to be in our life. We can make that kind of effort. That effort is called spiritual practice. Not religion, that's something else, but spiritual practice. So what I hope to convey to you today is the relevance of spiritual practice to our daily lives and how it can bring us balance in a busy and stressful world. For the past 100 years or so, our society, American society, has slowly become overwhelmed by the rapid growth of technology. And I think you'll sense there's some truth in that. The rapid growth of technology and the increasing abundance of material goods. That's what the 20th century brought us. Technology and material goods bring us many advantages in our lives. They make us safe. They protect our health. They increase our comfort. And they overall improve our quality of life. Technology and materialism, they do those things for us. But the problem is, over the past century or so, we have allowed them to create an environment that conditions us to be concerned mainly with what we can do and what we can possess. And we slowly start to lose our concern for who we really are, what we really are. That's the unintended consequences of technology and of material abundance, the unintended consequences. So for the past 2 or 3 generations, we have become more and more excited about consumer goods. I think the first Sears and Roebuck catalog came out in like 1898, and it became extremely popular because now you had pictures of the stuff that you could get. And over the century, that kind of advertising got more and more sophisticated. So we became slowly conditioned to getting more things, newer things, bigger things, better things, more entertaining things. Inherently, that's not bad. But there are unintended consequences because we slowly become conditioned to the feeling that I must have it. I have to have it. Do you ever open the newspaper? The back of the first section of the Mercury News has this huge fries ad, you know, and you look and say, oh, I got to have that, you know. We're becoming conditioned that way. It's not because we're bad people, but that's what's happening. When we become overwhelmed by materialism, our spiritual life diminishes because people become not so concerned who they are and how they are to be in this world, or what is helpful in this world, or what is the best way to understand other people and what is the best way to be with other people. We start to become concerned with our own personal well-being. That's just what happens. Doesn't mean we're bad people, but that's what happens. We become conditioned by the society we're in. It's what happens. So the fundamental insight of Buddhism, and your past 2 speakers were Buddhists, me too. The fundamental insight of Buddhism is that suffering, human suffering, comes from desire. If you know anything about Buddhism, that's the first thing you read. Suffering comes from desire, a desire that is based on ignorance of the real nature of the phenomenal world. Now, this ignorance that Buddhism talks about has nothing to do with not being smart. It has nothing to do with lack of intelligence or having a limited mental capacity. The ignorance that Buddhism talks about is the result of having a narrow worldview, as if we were living in a tunnel, a narrow worldview that comes from living in a tunnel. So that we cannot see or be aware of the world around us. And we cannot feel our intimacy and our connection with our world. And so therefore, we are unable to recognize the nature of things. That's what a narrow worldview does to us. We can't recognize the nature of things, and we lose our intimacy. It's like living in a dream world. which in turn causes us to think and behave foolishly and create suffering. Even though we may be very smart, even though intelligence may be there, we think and behave foolishly. Let me give you an example of that. I think you're all familiar with the story of Genesis. Story of Genesis. Adam and Eve lived in Eden, and they had everything. Everything they could possibly need. And so they were perfectly happy and content. No problems anywhere. They had everything. But they were tempted, and they had a desire for one more thing. They gave in to their desire for one more thing, even though they didn't need it. They gave in to a desire for one more thing, and that created suffering. That's the story of the Bible. Now, the Bible tells you that that's original sin. Buddhism says that's original foolishness. It has nothing to do with being sinful. It means being foolish. So when we give in to our desires for something we really don't need, it's acting foolishly, and that creates suffering. To me, that's the meaning of the Genesis story. That's the Buddhist interpretation of the Genesis story. So the antidote to desire and the antidote to suffering is spiritual practice. Now, it's not about religion. Spiritual practice is not about religion because there's no dogma connected with it, there's no worship, and there's no belief system. You don't have to believe in anything to engage in spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is about having our life express our inherent human qualities. Our inherent human qualities: generosity, patience, energy, caring, wisdom. Those are our inherent spiritual qualities. We are not originally sinful. We are originally like your previous two speakers, who were really nice guys and really cared. That's who we are fundamentally. And this is what spiritual practice is about, helping us manifest those qualities. We are inherently selfless. We are inherently unselfish. However, that quality gets too often obscured by our desires. This is the point of Buddhism. Desires get in the way of who you are. So when we have spiritual practice in our lives, when we can act selflessly, we have a feeling of satisfaction and joy despite any difficulties that may occur in our life. Despite any suffering that may occur, we feel okay. We feel joy in our life. We feel connected with each other. We feel friendly and warm. We're not jealous. We're not defensive. We're not competitive. We're not judgmental. That's spiritual practice. And it all starts with meditation. And you have a meditation program here in your workplace, and you're blessed because of it. Spiritual practice starts with meditation, which really is, when you look at meditation, when you look at what you're doing in meditation, it really is the practice of awareness. Awareness. Awareness is not a religious term, is it? Emphasizing awareness and practicing awareness is the basis of spiritual practice. Nothing to do with religion. The practice of awareness means we are continually present, not distracted. Or at least we're trying to be present, and we're trying not to be distracted. Can't do it 100%. We can't be perfect at it. We get distracted, but we try. We're making our best effort to be aware, to be present. So spiritual practice enables us to understand things beyond their appearances. and beyond what common sense may tell us about something or someone. We see beyond all that, and we see to the truth of things. This is what spiritual practice does for us. A short story about awareness and attention. Awareness, paying attention, it seems like a very, very ordinary activity. You know, something you do all the time, but actually it is the foundation. Like I say, it's the foundation of spiritual practice. Now, long time ago, once upon a time, say in the 9th century in China, there was a man who was a counselor to the emperor. And he went to see the local Zen master, and he said, in this kingdom, people are very difficult to govern. They are so unruly, it's really hard to manage them. It's really hard to govern them. They're so unruly. Please give me a word of wisdom to help govern them. So the Zen master picked up his brush, and he dipped it in the ink, and he wrote the calligraphy for attention. And maybe you can show me later what that looks like. So at this, the counselor got very angry. He said, hey, I asked you to help me. I asked you for some wisdom, and you give me this? Give me a word of wisdom. So the Zen teacher took his brush, dipped it in the ink, and he then wrote, attention, attention. And what does this mean? Why does attention equate to wisdom? How does attention govern the unruly? Now, we believe, we assume that we're always giving our attention. I'm aware, I know what's going on. We believe that, but it's not always so because we're very easily distracted. And when you do meditation, you notice that. You become aware of that. When you sit in meditation, you notice how your mind likes to go and do some other things. We are easily distracted, and we're always letting our awareness stray. And we multitask on purpose, don't we? We let our attention stray. So the Zen teacher tried to illustrate to this man, attention is the most important thing. There are many different ways, or many different things that we should pay our attention to. There are 3. First of all, we should pay attention to what we do in our daily life and to the things of our daily life. And when we do this completely, we can deeply understand how things exist in this world. And this is important, to understand how things are in the daily world. A world made up of temporary shapes, forms, colors, sounds that are constantly changing. Everything is constantly changing. And when we pay attention to the things of this world, we finally start to recognize that things are not permanent. So when we give our attention to the ordinary things of the world, we see into their true nature, and we see that all things have the same fundamental qualities without exception. And this is an important dimension of wisdom, understanding the nature of the things of the everyday world. The second thing we should pay attention to is each other, to people. How we are the same, how we are different from each other, how we react, how people create things, how people find comfort, how they are helpful to each other, and how they suffer. With awareness, we come to understand, with awareness of each other, with awareness of people, we come to understand how we should be with each other, and thereby come into harmony rather than isolation. And finally, the third thing that we should give our attention to and constantly be aware of is ourself. We should be aware of our activities and how we do them, how we do things. We should be aware of how we do things. Do we do them with a calm mind or a frantic mind? With anxiety or with peace? We should pay attention to ourselves, especially when we get clumsy and make a mistake. That's the most important time to be aware of ourselves. Because when we make a mistake, our awareness can alert us. I didn't pay attention just then. I made a mistake, I got clumsy. I didn't pay attention just then. And as we know, attention, attention. Awareness can tell us, oh, I didn't pay attention just then. Then we can pay attention to any feelings that arise because we made a mistake. Look at my response to that. Look at my reaction to that. Painful feelings can arise when we do something clumsy, when we make a mistake. Painful feelings just can arise in us. And that's a form of suffering, those painful feelings. And from that suffering, we can make a vow to be more mindful and to pay attention. In that way, a mistake can be helpful. If we pay attention to it and open to it, not push it away, it can be helpful because it causes us to suffer a little bit. And out of that suffering, we say, I don't want that to happen again. I'm going to pay attention. Mistakes can be helpful, and they can help us be creative if we're willing to pay attention to them. So if we don't have awareness practice continually, life gets mixed up. We make all kinds of mistakes, we don't pay any attention to them, and life keeps getting crazy. Life gets mixed up, and our view of life becomes narrow, like as if we're looking at the world from inside of a tunnel. And without awareness, without paying attention to the way things are, and to the way people are, and to the way we are, without paying attention to that, we can become fooled by appearances. We become fooled by appearances. We can't tell the difference between something that's good and something that appears to be good. We get all mixed up. And we become a slave to our desires, to our preferences, to fashions, and to our unexamined values. We all carry around a set of values about what we think is the truth of things and the way things should be. But have we really examined them to see if they're valid? Without awareness, we don't examine our own values. And who knows, they could be way off base. When we become a slave to our desires and our preferences, our reflection and our selflessness, it gets short-circuited. However, there is a feeling emerging in our society. It's just starting to emerge that fulfilling our desires is not enough to provide us meaning. The fact that you have a meditation program here is evidence that something's happening. Something is emerging in our culture that says, this materialism, this technology, you know, it's maybe not enough. People are beginning to to think this way. People are beginning to recognize that putting the emphasis on consuming leaves an empty feeling. There is a sense that there must be more to life than possessions. More and more people are beginning to feel this way. When we recognize that pursuing happiness is a superficial way to live, we start to ask ourselves, what should be my true orientation in life? If that doesn't work, if that gives me an empty feeling, what should I be doing? What's my true orientation? And we look around for other choices, and some are beginning to emerge. We ask ourselves, what's the point of my life? How should I live it? What is happiness anyhow? What is it after all? These are spiritual questions. These are spiritual questions. They're like they're everyday questions, but they're really spiritual questions because it means we are seeking, we want to know what it is that's real. When we start asking those kinds of questions, this is the start of spiritual practice. So practice starts with recognizing that pleasures are not enough and that attaching to them robs us of understanding and distracts us from living an authentic life. At bottom, that's what we want. We want to know what's real, what's true, and we want to live our life authentically. If we get caught up pursuing possessions, it covers over this fundamental desire. When we finally get fed up with possessions, we say, wait a minute, I have some questions here I need to explore and answer. And I really believe that's what's starting to happen. It's been starting to happen for the last 50 years. These things have a very slow momentum, but that's what's happening. Now, many people are very skeptical of the notion or the idea of spiritual practice. They think spiritual practice means you have to drop out of society, you have to go live on a mountain, or you have to live in the desert or a cave or something. Or they say, well, it's too demanding for me, an ordinary person. I can't do that. They feel that spiritual practice will interfere with having a normal, everyday life, and that we have to live in some kind of austere, ascetic, and what's the other word I'm thinking about? I'll think about it later. I just lost the word. What is it when you're not married, when you don't have relations with another? Celibate. They think spiritual life means you have to be celibate, ascetic, and austere. You have to live in isolation. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Said he was going to program me right out of here. It's not true. It's not so. It's not so. Material and physical comforts are okay. They're inherently not bad. Fun is okay, right? Fun is okay. Satisfaction is okay. Having friends is okay. Having a family life is okay. Working on problems with your friends and solving these problems and making progress, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a sin. But it is true that we as human beings are easily overwhelmed with pleasures and possessions. Material things surround us everywhere you go, and they encourage our desires and they encourage attachments. And they interfere with our understanding and with wisdom. They interfere with our relationships, and they interfere with our peace of mind if we let it go too far. Now, when we recognize the limitations of possessions and comforts, then we start to seek balance in our lives. Few people, a very small percentage of people say, I'm dropping out of all this, it's too much. I'm going to go live on a mountain. It's too much, I give it up. Most of us say, you know, this stuff isn't sinful by itself, but I got to find a balance. I got to find a balance. So we seek balance in our lives when we recognize that there is a limitation to pursuing possessions. And we turn to spiritual practice to understand. We turn to spiritual practice to understand who we are fundamentally and what life should be beyond having possessions and what life is like beyond the appearance of things. So material greatness is not the true measure of a society. You know, we think about some previous empires, the Roman Empire or the empire of Alexander the Great, the great Roman Empire, the great Babylonian Empire, whatever it may be, usually we measure that greatness based on the material accomplishments. But the true measure of greatness of a society or of an individual is in non-material relationships. The true greatness is in our non-material relationships, such as how we support each other, how we care for each other, how we encourage each other, how we create things together, and our openness with each other. This is the true measure of greatness, not how material well off we were or are. So our awareness, our practice of awareness, our spiritual practice, encourages us to reflect on ourselves and how we are in the world and how we relate to people and to things. Are we careful of what we do and what we say? Do we take care with that? Are we attentive? Are we accepting? Are we respectful of each other and of what the world offers? Or are we interested only in what pleases us? And do we simply ignore what we don't like? And therefore, do we become careless? Spiritual practice, our awareness practice, encourages us to reflect on those aspects of our life. Now, despite all of our efforts to create a trouble-free world, unpleasant things arise, difficulties do arise. And it's beyond our control most of the time because things just change. But if we react to these difficulties by complaining and pushing things away, we simply create problems. I remember something that I experienced when I was really small. I must have been 3 or 4 years old. I'll never forget this episode. I was a kid, really a little kid, and I was at a friend's house playing with a friend at his house, and his mother said, "Oh, come on, here's lunch." So we went and sat down at the table for lunch, and his mother had prepared something, gave each of us a plate of what she prepared, and my friend picked up the plate and he threw it across the room, because clearly he wasn't happy with what his mother had prepared. A mature mind doesn't do that. A mature mind is grateful and accepts whatever is offered by the world. The immature mind says, the heck with it, and throws it across the room. We don't do that. We try not to do that. A mature mind doesn't do that. So the most important thing that we can do for ourselves is observe ourselves and the various ways that we have as human beings of creating problems, because we all have the capacity to create problems, and we do from time to time. When we become aware of the difficulties that we ourselves create, we learn from them. We learn from them. And we learn how it is that we create them. And then, through that education, we can learn to avoid the traps that we fall into, like Adam and Eve. They didn't get a second chance. But if they had a chance to reflect on what they did, they wouldn't reach out for one more thing. When we learn how we create problems and learn how to avoid the traps, we can reorient our mind so that we understand ourselves and our life. I'd like to tell you a story now, or relate something that I read that illustrates what I've been trying to say for the last half hour. Occasionally there is a real-life story that demonstrates how people devise their own suffering. I read an article in the San Francisco magazine back in December of 2003. It's already an old article, but it really struck me, and so I brought the experience of it here today to share with you. The article was titled "Larger Than Death." And it documents, it traces the suicide of a woman named Ella King Torrey, who had been the president of the San Francisco Art Institute. She took her own life when she was 45 years old. Now, she took the job as president of the Art Institute, which was a very challenging job. In 1995, she took the job. She took over a very well-respected school, but the school was underfunded and needed some energy and some vision. Now, Ella King Torrey was a supercharged woman. She had overwhelming enthusiasm. She had infinite number of ideas. She was very focused in her ambition and on her work. She delighted meeting creative and intelligent people and bringing them together. She loved putting together innovative and ingenious networks of people. She was very good at that. And she was inspired by making things new and creating something out of nothing. That's the way she was described. She loved to create something out of nothing. She was really charged up, much in the same way that you are, creating something and making something out of nothing. She was a terrific fundraiser. I don't know if you're terrific fundraisers. She was a great fundraiser. She knew all these influential people, and she could do that. She increased the donations to the San Francisco Art Institute fourfold while she was president, from $500,000 a year to $2.5 million a year. She was great. But she also spent very lavishly. She spent on visiting artists, on building projects, on exhibitions of art, and on providing grants to struggling artists. And she also spent a lot of money on expanding the library of the Institute. Now, when the dot-com bubble dried up and the donations to the Institute dried up, the board of directors discovered a huge deficit. Because she was the president, she took the blame. She got fired in April of 2002 after 7 years on the job. She got fired because of this deficit. And it was a year later that she took her own life. She committed suicide without leaving a note. Her friends and her colleagues were absolutely dumbfounded, absolutely bewildered. They couldn't comprehend how this woman, who had such purpose and such an appetite for the exciting life. You know, she loved fine food in San Francisco. She loved the wine, and she loved the beautiful things and the fashions. She loved dressing up in color. She loved to laugh. She loved her friends. How could such a person take her own life? Nobody could figure it out. I think that the source of this tragedy can be traced to how she saw herself in a limited way, as if she saw herself from inside a tunnel. She saw herself in a limited way. She saw herself strictly as a glamorous and successful person, constantly in the limelight, doing terrific things and being enthusiastically applauded by her successes. The firing, when she got fired, it destroyed this image she had of herself, this desperate image she had of herself. Her firing destroyed that. It was an image that caused her to believe, it's an image that defined who she was. An image that defined that it was an image of what she believed she had obtained and what she felt she had to obtain. It was an image. It was an image of herself. It wasn't her true self. It was an image defined by what she did in her everyday life, but it wasn't her true self. It was an image of herself. It was an image that depended on her grasping for and holding on to the things of this world which have no permanency, and which by their constantly changing nature they can't be held on to. So something changed in the economic world, the donations dried up, She got fired, things changed, and this change destroyed her image of herself. I see her, I think she saw herself in a kind of chess game. How many of you play chess? Okay, if you play chess, you know that the most powerful piece on the chessboard is the white queen. The white queen. She saw herself as the white queen. Being in charge, having the capacity to make very powerful moves. Now, when in chess, sometimes the game takes a very surprising turn and the queen has to be sacrificed for some other advantage. It's pretty rare, but it's part of a chess player's strategy sometimes to sacrifice the queen. That's what happened here. The game continued, but she could no longer play. That's how she saw herself. The game's still going on, but she wasn't in it anymore, was no longer in it as the white queen. So, because she did not have an inner vision of who she was, because her belief was that she was in the game as the white queen, and that's all there was for her, not being president of the San Francisco Art Institute left her with an empty feeling and without purpose, or any meaning in life. In other words, her life, very successful life that she had up to a point, was lived externally. Very exciting. It was a very exciting life, but it didn't have intimacy and it didn't have reflection. So her tragedy was her inability or her unwillingness to stop the rush to grasp what is out there. That's where all her energy came from. She was in a rush to grasp what was out there. Now, this rush probably fueled her creativity. But her story should warn us that we put ourselves at risk for suffering and for tragedy when the rush is all we know. Whoops. Okay. It's all right. When the rush is all we know, we put ourselves at risk. Now, the founder of Zen Buddhism in Japan was the Zen priest named Dogen, and he wrote a lot and he gave a lot of talks. And one of the most memorable things he said in one of his talks goes like this. To study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Now, this woman, Ella King Torrey, was unable to study herself. She was unable to contemplate the purpose of her life beyond the everyday successes of the daily world, the transient successes of the daily world. She was unable to contemplate her life beyond that. She didn't realize that her inherent true self was not diminished because she got fired. She didn't know who she really was beyond the image she had of herself. And when that image was destroyed, she couldn't take it. She was unable to allow herself to be enlightened by all things rather than grasping for them. If she could have done that, she would have had a balanced life that did not end in a self-inflicted tragedy. Awareness practice, spiritual practice, meditation practice, say it any way you like. It quiets the mind so that we can come back to calmness and to balance. So we can come back to balance. When our mind is noisy, it means it's in a kind of panic. And what do I do next? Where are my glasses? I put my glasses somewhere. Where are they? We're in a panic. How do I get out of this busyness that I'm in? That's not a quiet mind. That's a noisy mind. The noisy mind does not understand the need to go back to before the beginning, to before step one. For example, when you're given a problem, when you come across a problem to solve in your life or your work, you don't start solving it immediately. Somebody says, here's a problem. You don't say, step one to the solution is this. You don't do that. What you do first is you try to fully understand the nature of the problem. You become intimate with the problem itself before you start coming up with solutions. In other words, before you do something, you need to understand the point of doing. When you start rushing to solve a problem before you understand it, it doesn't work. And in your own experience, you probably have done that, and you learn from it, and you don't do that anymore. But before we do something about a problem, we go back before step one. We go back to zero. Through awareness practice, we learn how to bring our mind back to zero and back to balance. Before we do something to solve a problem, or before we do something with our life, we come to balance. This is the point of meditation practice. Come back to balance. Come back to balance. Come back to a mind that isn't noisy. Before jumping out there and trying to solve some problem. Before doing something, before we know what it is we're doing. So to solve a problem or to live in the very next moment, we first have to prepare our mind to come back to zero through awareness practice, spiritual practice. Then our problems can be seen through the perspective of our true nature, rather than through panic or through our emotions. So awareness practice, meditation practice, will train our mind to bring our awareness and our balance to everyday affairs. So, if we become troubled by some emotion or feeling during the day, we can recognize, anger is starting to arise in me, or fear is starting to arise in me, or sadness, or grief, or some feeling, some emotion. When we recognize and accept the feeling that's happening, the mind can return to balance. And this is what's called starting from zero. The emotion may not go away, but it won't be troublesome. It's natural. Oh, okay. Okay. In Zen, spiritual practice has always been associated with work. Let me try to illustrate that. A saying from back in the 9th century by a Zen layman: my magical power and my spiritual exercise consist in carrying water and gathering firewood. What does this mean? It means that the everyday world, the relative everyday world, is not different from the spiritual world. Another story that goes along with that, the abbot of a Zen monastery in the 4th century always worked out in the fields with his monks, and he became, when he was into his 80s, he still worked out there, and they became concerned that he was still working at this advanced age, and they told him to stop, and he said no. So they hid his garden tools, his tools, and with that he stopped eating. So they gave him back his tools. And then one night in a talk he said, a day of no work is a day of no food. The point I'm trying to make is spiritual practice in the Zen tradition anyhow, has always been associated with work. How we do our work is our spiritual practice. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. Oh, nope. Okay. Okay. When there is spiritual practice in the workplace, there are benefits to the individual. There's increased ability to focus on a task or a relationship. There's more energy during the day and a sense of buoyancy at the end of the day. Rather than stress at the end of the day, you feel buoyant and confident. There is increased confidence in our own ability to respond positively to whatever may arise. There's better capacity to listen and to empathize with others. There's more patience and tolerance in complex situations, and there is reduced stress in the midst of continual distractions and demands. These are the benefits to the individual. To the workplace as a whole, there are benefits. As people learn to accept and work with change, we become, rather than feeling threatened by change, we become more enterprising and thoughtful, and we expand the total creative capacity of our workplace. When we become open to new ideas and to risk-taking, well, we do become open to new ideas and risk-taking because fear and stress diminish as we pursue our spiritual practice. We communicate ideas more effectively because we become more focused as listeners and more persuasive as speakers, because our ideas become clearer and the depth of our commitment becomes clearer. This happens when you do spiritual practice and you practice awareness. We have higher productivity, higher efficiency, quality of work improves, morale improves, because of our improvement in interpersonal relationships. Problems are solved in a more comprehensive manner because we see things in a broader scale, not through a tunnel. And our decision-making is improved because we focus on creative choices rather than personal concerns. Oh, well. Okay. I want to close with a story, a real-life story that indicates, that expresses how simple meditation practice can totally change a life. Spiritual practice. I'm going to read you this story rather than just relate it to you. I took the trouble to write it out as a story, and it got published. So I'm just going to read it to you, if you don't mind. It reads like a piece of fiction. Crawl and stop, crawl and stop. Even by 9:30, the manic commute into the city had not yet settled itself into a smooth trajectory. Patience remained essential. On this damp November morning, we were making our 10th consecutive daily trip into San Francisco to teach the final hour of meditation at work. Shelley broke the silence of the city as the city skyline came into view, the sun starting to show through the thinning fog. "How do you think the class is going?" Her voice betrayed a tinge of concern. "It's hard to say. This group is so different from the others." Shelley had offered to help me teach meditation at work to a unique group of students in a unique training program called Step Ahead. Step Ahead was a 28-week welfare to work program co-sponsored by PG&E, the San Francisco Department of Human Services, City College of San Francisco, and the Women's Foundation of San Francisco. The students, mostly women, including many single mothers, all experiencing stress and uncertainty in their lives, were being taught marketable workplace skills, including word processing, spreadsheet preparation, and database maintenance. PG&E guaranteed a job for at least 6 months to successful graduates. I was asked to teach meditation at work as part of the Step Ahead curriculum to offer the students a way to reduce stress and maintain composure as they struggled to master new technical skills and to learn how to swim upstream in the daunting, often turbulent corporate world. It's not easy for them to sit still, Shelley said. There's a lot of fidgeting going on. Part of it may be that it's not voluntary. They have to attend. It's part of the whole program they're in, I said, keeping my eye on the on-again, off-again taillights in front of us. That's right. I wouldn't want to be told that I had to meditate. I sure would have a lot of resistance. It's something you have to come to on your own. The conversation paused as we turned off the freeway and headed into downtown. After a few minutes, Shelley spoke up again. I think one of the biggest difficulties for them is the subtleness of meditation. They don't get any feedback. It's hard for them to tell if they're getting anything from it. For sure, that must be discouraging. Shelley is a marriage and family therapist, specializing in addiction and recovery, working with high-risk teens and their families. She is intimately familiar with the mountainous work. She's intimately familiar with the mountainous world of lifelong frustration and discouragement, of the frightening, slippery cold feelings of hopelessness and isolation. Over the past 2 weeks, she and I had listened to the stories of our students, trying to find ways to encourage them to sit quietly with an alert posture and to stay aware of their breathing. During the meditation part of the class sessions, many gave up immediately, unable to find a minimum of self-discipline, slumping in their chairs with their arms folded, waiting for the 20 minutes to end. Even for those that were giving the practice a chance and making their best effort, I knew it must be frustrating. I wondered if we had done any good, if all the commuting and the effort had been worth it. At the end of the class on this final Friday, the students thanked us as we in turn wished them well with their studies and their new careers. And then something happened. Then something happened that erased all my doubts. The last woman to leave the classroom took me by the arm and drew me aside. In her tearful voice, barely audible, I heard relief and gratitude. "Mr. Kaye," she said, "I don't hit my little boy anymore." That always happens to me when I tell that story. Do you have any questions about anything that I tried to convey to you today? Yes, please.
I actually have two questions. When you say spiritual practice, I mean, other religions have their way of doing spiritual practices, right? So when you say role of spiritual practice, it just doesn't mean meditation. It means the whole broad, different spiritual practices. When you're referring to spiritual practices in the modern world.
So let me try to say your question.
Okay, thank you. So my question was, when you say spiritual practice, you said it doesn't concern religion. You just mean spiritual practice. And I know a lot of people who doesn't meditate, but they think they're doing spiritual practice because they're religious beliefs, right? Do you also include that in when you say when you mean by spiritual practice?
No. Spiritual practice, to me, is based on awareness, paying attention to ourselves, paying attention to the world around us, having an open mind, and being ready to accept whatever the world tells us, not having a closed mind. This is spiritual practice, paying attention. And
the second question was about meditation. have a way to meditate, or just sitting down and calming down? Like, is there a specific way that you should meditate, or do you endorse such a meditation technique, or?
Well, I think we're going to be doing that in a few minutes. We're going to be having a meditation session.
Right.
I'll show you.
But there's all different kinds of meditation techniques or different ways, and so do you sort of convey one over the other, or?
I'll show you one,
Okay.
but let me say something. You use the word technique. Somebody once, I was present when somebody in an interview, a radio interview, asked a Zen teacher, "What technique do you use in meditation? What technique do you use to encourage people's meditation?" And he said, "We use the most important technique, people's own sincerity." This is the basis of spiritual practice.
So that was basically my question. So
Okay.
There is no technique, right? It's just how you go about what you just said,
Yes,
right?
the technique is not important. It's our attitude that's important. Okay, one more question, if there is one. Yes.
I'm not sure if this is more an observation than a question. I found a bit of what I'd call cognitive dissonance on your Adam and Eve analogy, which I think I understand your message from that, but I think that particular story may not be the best match for the point you were trying to make, because the classical interpretation of Adam and Eve is, or if the exact reading is that originally when they were happy, they were ignorant. And what they sought, it was the tree of knowledge. The fruit was from the tree of knowledge, and so basically they took the bite, and in effect they became aware of how the world really was, and suddenly became unhappy, which I think is at odds with the message that you're carrying, which is that what we're actually seeking is a greater awareness of the world as it really is. To achieve our happiness or awareness, happiness or, I don't know, spiritual. I don't want to use the word enlightenment, but just my point is that the story. I understand the point that you are making with the story, but I think it's probably not the best one to use. I think it's probably not the best story to use, because there is a second contradictory message that's classically brought along with that one.
When they bit the apple, they saw how the world wasn't.
Right. Well, yeah. I think the wording is it's the tree. It's the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and so Meng is signaling that we actually need to go. But thank you for your talk. It was
Thank you.
Enlightening and informative. Thank you.
Thank you.